Coming up on 5 Minute News. Republicans finally acknowledge Biden's victory. Iran's probe into downing of airliner has major flaws. And dismay as London's theatres forced to close their doors again. It's Wednesday, December 16. I'm Anthony Davis. More than a month after the election, top Republicans finally acknowledged Joe Biden as the next US president, a collapse in GOP resistance to the millions of voters who decisively chose the Democrat. Foreign leaders joined the parade too, including Russia's Vladimir Putin. Speaking from the floor of the US Senate, where Biden spent 36 years of his career, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell congratulated his former colleague as president-elect. The two men spoke later in the day. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, meanwhile, was to meet with his likely successor in the new administration, Antony Blinken. And GOP Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, one of Donald Trump's closest allies, said he'd spoken with some of Biden's cabinet picks. A similar shift unfolded in capitals across the world, where leaders including Russia's Putin and Mexico's Andrés Manuel López Obrador acknowledged Biden's win. The move comes a day after electors nationwide formally cast votes affirming Biden's victory in last month's election. And while that clears a more stable path for Biden to assume the presidency, it does little to stop Trump from continuing to try to undermine confidence in the results with baseless allegations that have been rejected by judges across the political spectrum. As Republicans began discussing a Biden presidency more openly on Tuesday, Trump still pledged to press forward with almost non-existent legal options, appearing to relish the evangelical support of his base more than protecting the fabric of American democracy. Iran is not conducting its investigation into the downing of a civilian airliner in January properly, and many questions remain unanswered, an independent Canadian report into the tragedy said on Tuesday. The 79-page document is the latest expression of frustration from Western nations into how the Islamic Republic is handling the aftermath of a disaster that claimed 176 lives. Iran's Revolutionary Guard say they accidentally shot down the Ukraine International Airlines plane shortly after takeoff, mistaking it for a missile when tensions with the United States were high. Many of the victims were Canadian citizens or permanent residents. Former Canadian Cabinet Minister Ralph Goodale, charged with helping the victims' families and examining how to deal with similar disasters in future, said many of the key details of this horrific event remain unknown. Iran has not conducted its investigations in a truly independent, objective and transparent manner, and answers to critical questions are absent, he wrote in the report. Last month, the United Nations Aviation Agency and Ukraine complained separately about how Iran was conducting the probe. There's not much of a track record to base any optimism on so far, Goodale said by phone when asked about the chances of Tehran carrying out a fully transparent investigation. Just before the disaster, Iran had fired missiles at US bases in Iraq. 5 days earlier, Donald Trump had ordered the killing of Revolutionary Guards commander Qasem Soleimani in Iraq, causing panic in the region as the military feared a full-on invasion. Goodale said Iran needed to explain how it had assessed the risks to civilian aircraft, why it had left the airspace open, and also why the guards had decided to down the plane. Canada and other nations who lost citizens are pressing Iran for reparations and a formal apology. London's theatres will close again on Wednesday as the British capital moves into the toughest level of coronavirus restrictions, with some forced to close Christmas shows just days after they opened, in a hammer blow for the industry. The government on Monday announced that the rate of coronavirus infections was rising exponentially in London, and all hospitality and indoor entertainment would close, giving the industry just 2 days' notice. It's a huge blow for the casts, for the crew, for the creative teams. A huge amount of money has been invested in getting these Christmas shows up and running, and now they have to close, said Julian Bird, chief executive of the Society of London Theatre. About 30 theatres are open in London, he said, ranging in size from small pub theatres to massive auditoriums. After an extremely difficult year, many theatres had adapted their premises and shows to be COVID-safe, with reduced capacity, socially distanced seating, and temperature checks at the door. Audiences felt safe, he said. London's theatre scene is slightly bigger than Broadway in New York, with just over 15 million attendances in 2019, according to the Society of London Theatre's box office data. The city's theatres saw revenue of nearly £800 million last year, with the average ticket costing around £50. The decision to move London into Tier 3 lockdown, described as incredibly difficult and heart-rending, comes after many families have spent months unable to see or hug one another during the coronavirus pandemic, and just a week before the reunions were due to start. You can subscribe to 5 Minute News on YouTube with your preferred podcast app. Ask your smart speaker or enable 5 Minute News as your Amazon Alexa flash briefing skill. Subscribe, rate and review online at 5minute.news. 5 Minute News is an Evergreen podcast covering politics, inequality, health and climate, delivering independent, unbiased and essential world news daily.